Beatrice stood in front of the mirror, the silk of her wedding dress pooling at her feet like ripples in a calm sea. She traced her fingertips along the edge of the lace veil, wondering if the reflection staring back at her was really her. Tomorrow, she would be Mrs. Edward Hastings, and everyone around her was buzzing with excitement. Her mother had already mentioned how it would be the wedding of the year. Her friends had gushed over how perfect her life was, and Edward, well, Edward was everything a woman could ask for. Everything seemed flawless, but inside, there was a quiet, persistent voice whispering, "Is this what you truly want?" She had met Edward 3 years ago, introduced by mutual friends at a garden party. From the moment they'd started dating, everything had felt smooth and effortless. He was kind, stable, and reliable, the perfect picture of a gentleman. They never argued, and he always anticipated her needs before she even voiced them. But recently, Beatrice had found herself questioning if something crucial was missing. Was it passion? Was it spontaneity? Whatever it was, she couldn't shake the feeling that this relationship, though ideal on paper, lacked the fire she had once imagined true love to hold. As she stood in the bridal suite, gazing at the future that seemed so certain, her mind was clouded with doubt. She couldn't help but think back to when they had first fallen in love. Back then, there had been butterflies, excitement, and the thrill of newness. Now, it felt as though they were simply moving through the motions, ticking off life milestones as if following a script. Her heart should have been pounding with anticipation. Instead, it felt heavy. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Beatrice," came the voice of one of the hotel staff. "A letter was left for you downstairs." "A letter?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, miss. It's here." The young woman handed her a delicate envelope sealed with wax. Beatrice thanked her and waited until she left before sitting down at the edge of her bed, carefully opening the letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Elegant, sweeping strokes filled the page. Her eyes skimmed over the words, and immediately her breath caught in her throat. "My dearest, from the moment I saw you, I knew my life had changed forever. Each time I think of you, my heart beats faster, my breath grows shorter. You may never know who I am, but the depth of my love for you is endless. You have captivated me in ways I cannot express, and I long for the day I can finally tell you everything. But for now, know that I will be here, watching from afar, loving you quietly but intensely, with every beat of my heart." Her hands trembled as she read the final words. There was no name at the bottom, just the overwhelming sincerity of the sentiments written. She felt something stir within her, something that had been dormant for a long time. This letter, it was unlike anything she had ever received, and it was certainly unlike anything Edward would ever send. The second letter arrived the next day, slipped under her door while Beatrice was alone in her bridal suite. The wedding preparations continued around her, with everyone blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside her. Edward had spent the morning finalizing plans, completely unaware of her growing unease. She hesitated before picking up the envelope. The elegant handwriting, the creamy paper, it was the same as before. As her fingers opened the seal, her heart raced with anticipation. This letter was shorter, but even more intimate. "I can't stop thinking of you. Every moment is filled with thoughts of you. Even though you may never know who I am, you are everything I dream about. My heart aches knowing that I may never hold you. But still, I love you in silence, cherishing these moments of imagining what could be." Beatrice's stomach twisted as she read those words. They were written with such passion, such longing. Whoever this person was, they knew her, understood her in ways that felt both unsettling and thrilling. The language felt deeply personal, as if the writer had been watching her, silently waiting for the perfect moment to reveal their feelings. She couldn't help but compare the sentiments in these letters to her relationship with Edward. Edward was reliable and stable. Yes, but where was the fire, the intensity that these letters evoked? Their love had settled into a routine, and while there was comfort in that, a part of her longed for something more. Her thoughts were interrupted when Edward walked into the room, his smile warm and familiar. He came over to her, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Everything's coming together perfectly. Tomorrow is going to be amazing." Beatrice forced a smile, but her mind was far from the wedding. The contrast between the Edward standing in front of her and the mysterious author of these letters was stark. She wondered if Edward even realized how distant they had grown. Did he feel it too? Or was she the only one who had been struggling with these doubts? Later that afternoon, a third letter arrived. "You are about to marry someone else, and it tears me apart. I've loved you from afar, but I can't bear the thought of losing you forever. I wish I had the courage to tell you who I am, but I fear it may be too late. You deserve a love that burns brighter than anything you've ever known. Will you find me before it's too late?" The urgency in the words was undeniable. Beatrice felt her pulse quicken as she read the letter over and over again. This person, whoever they were, believed in a love so intense, so consuming, that it was worth risking everything for. It was the kind of love she had once imagined for herself before life became predictable. The words played over and over in her mind, echoing her own deepest fears. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how disconnected she felt from Edward. She had been avoiding this realization for so long, clinging to the safety and comfort of their relationship. But these letters had awakened something in her that she couldn't ignore. By evening, Beatrice's emotions had spiraled into a whirlwind of confusion. She stood at the window, staring out at the garden below, her heart heavy with doubt. How could she marry Edward when she didn't even know if she still loved him the way she should? The passion these letters described was something she hadn't felt in a long time. And the more she thought about it, the more unsure she became about the life she was about to commit to. The wedding was a day away, but all she could think about was the man behind the letters. The person who saw her in a way Edward never seemed to anymore. How could she ignore that? For the first time in her life, Beatrice wasn't sure if she could go through with something everyone expected her to do. The night before the wedding, Beatrice found herself pacing her room, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside, her world felt as though it were coming apart. The letters lay scattered on her desk, their contents pulling at her heartstrings. Tomorrow, she was supposed to walk down the aisle. She was supposed to marry Edward, the man everyone said was perfect for her. But as she stood there, her mind swirling with doubt, she felt anything but certain. The words in the letters had opened up an emotional chasm she hadn't expected, forcing her to confront feelings she had buried long ago. She had spent the entire day thinking about her relationship with Edward, replaying every moment in her mind. From the early days when everything was fresh and exciting to the slow, comfortable rhythm they had fallen into over the years. But the love she shared with Edward now felt muted, predictable, and that terrified her. Was she really going to marry someone out of obligation? Out of fear of disappointing everyone around her? The thought weighed on her heavily. She wanted to love Edward the way he deserved to be loved, but deep down, she knew something was missing. Something the letters had reawakened in her, an intensity, a longing for more. Beatrice sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the engagement ring on her finger. The diamond sparkled under the soft light of the room, a symbol of everything she thought she wanted. But now, it felt like a burden, a reminder of the life she had been preparing for without fully questioning if it was the right one. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, reminding her of last-minute wedding details. Beatrice's heart clenched as she thought of all the people who would be there tomorrow, expecting to see her commit to Edward. How could she possibly disappoint them all? But how could she go through with the wedding when her heart was full of doubt? Taking a deep breath, Beatrice reached for the letters once more. She read them slowly, her eyes lingering on the final lines of the third letter. "You deserve a love that burns brighter than anything you've ever known." Those words echoed in her mind, pulling her toward a decision she hadn't been ready to face. She couldn't do it. She couldn't marry Edward. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, dialing her mother's number. When her mother picked up, Beatrice could hear the excitement in her voice. "Mom," Beatrice said, her throat tight, "I need to talk to you. It's important." "What's wrong, sweetheart?" her mother asked, concern quickly replacing her cheerful tone. I can't go through with the wedding," Beatrice whispered, her voice breaking. "I've been having doubts for a while. and I need to figure out what's really going on before I make this commitment. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Beatrice, what are you saying? The wedding is tomorrow. Everyone is here. I know, Beatrice said, tears filling her eyes. But I can't marry Edward. Not like this. I need time to figure things out. Please understand. Her mother's voice was filled with shock and confusion, but Beatrice couldn't listen anymore. She ended the call and sat in the quiet of the room, the weight of her decision sinking in. She had just canceled her wedding. Her entire world had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes, but deep down, she knew it was the right choice. She couldn't marry Edward while her heart was so full of uncertainty. She needed to find the person who had written those letters, the one who had stirred something deep inside her, and figure out what that meant for her future. With that, Beatrice stood determined. Tomorrow would no longer be her wedding day. It would be the day she searched for the truth. The morning after what should have been her wedding day felt surreal. The world outside the hotel seemed to move on, indifferent to the emotional turmoil raging inside Beatrice. She had barely slept, her mind running over the consequences of her decision. Family members were likely furious, friends confused, and Edward, she couldn't even begin to imagine how he felt. But there was no turning back now. The wedding was off, and Beatrice had one mission: to find the person who had written those letters and understand why they had shaken her life so profoundly. As she prepared to leave the hotel, her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from concerned loved ones, but she couldn't bear to respond. She needed space, clarity, and answers. Her first thought was to revisit people from her past, old friends, acquaintances, and anyone who might have harbored secret feelings for her. The idea felt far-fetched, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the author of the letters knew her intimately. Maybe it was someone she had overlooked, someone she hadn't noticed in the rush of life. She decided to start with Thomas, her ex-boyfriend. They had broken up amicably 2 years before she met Edward, but as she reflected on the letters, she wondered if Thomas might still carry feelings for her. He was always expressive, more open with his emotions than Edward ever had been. Perhaps he had found a way to reach out to her now, at the most critical time of her life. When she arrived at his apartment, Beatrice hesitated before knocking on the door. She hadn't seen Thomas in over a year, and the thought of him being behind these passionate declarations felt strange, but not impossible. The door opened, and Thomas's familiar face appeared, a look of surprise crossing his features. "Beatrice?" he asked, stepping aside to let her in. "What's going on? I thought you were getting married today." Beatrice took a deep breath, feeling awkward and unsure of how to start. "I canceled the wedding." Thomas raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Wow, I didn't expect that. Are you okay?" Beatrice forced a smile, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I've been having doubts for a while. But, Thomas, I need to ask you something." She hesitated, feeling the weight of the question. "Did you write me any letters recently? Anonymous ones?" Thomas looked genuinely confused. "Letters? No, I haven't written to you since we broke up." "Why would you think I did?" Beatrice felt a wave of embarrassment flood over her. Of course, it wasn't him. She had been grasping at straws. "I'm sorry," she muttered quickly. "It's just never mind. I shouldn't have bothered you with this." She turned to leave, but Thomas stopped her. "B, are you sure you're okay? You seem lost." She paused, realizing just how true his words were. "I'm trying to figure things out." "Thanks, Thomas." She left quickly, her mind still racing. As she walked down the street, she felt more confused than ever. If it wasn't Thomas, then who could it be? The letters were filled with such deep, personal insight into her feelings, her emotions. How could it be that no one came to mind? Returning to her hotel room that evening, defeated, Beatrice picked up the letters once more. This time, as she read them more slowly, a nagging thought began to take shape in her mind. She recognized a specific phrase in one of the letters, a phrase Edward had used once, long ago. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. No, it couldn't be. But as the realization took hold, she couldn't shake the thought. Could Edward have been the one writing the letters all along? Beatrice's hands trembled as the possibility settled over her. Edward, the man she was about to marry, the man she thought she knew better than anyone, Could he really have been behind the letters? The more she thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. The timing, the intensity, the familiar phrasing, it all pointed to him. But why? Why would Edward hide behind anonymous letters instead of simply talking to her? There was only one way to find out. Without giving herself time to second guess, Beatrice left her room and headed straight to Edward's apartment. The thought of confronting him filled her with a mix of dread and urgency. If it was him, she needed to understand why he had gone to such lengths to conceal his feelings. When she arrived, she knocked on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. Edward opened it almost immediately, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and confusion. "Beatrice," he said softly, stepping aside to let her in. "I've been trying to reach you all day. Are you okay? What's going on?" Beatrice felt a lump form in her throat, but she pushed it down. She couldn't let her emotions cloud her now. "Edward," she began, her voice shaky but determined, "I need you to be honest with me. Did you write these?" She pulled the letters from her bag and held them up, watching his reaction closely. Edward's eyes widened as he looked at the letters. For a moment, he said nothing, but the truth was already written all over his face. "Yes," he whispered finally, his voice barely audible. "I wrote them." Beatrice's heart sank. Her worst fears were confirmed. "Why?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this? Why didn't you just talk to me?" Edward sighed, running a hand through his hair as he looked away, guilt etched in every line of his face. "Because I was afraid," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "I knew something was wrong between us, but every time I tried to bring it up, it felt like you were pulling further away. I didn't know how to reach you anymore." Beatrice felt a mix of anger and sadness bubbling inside her. "So, instead of being honest, you hid behind these letters? You tried to manipulate me into feeling something?" "I wasn't trying to manipulate you," Edward said quickly, stepping closer. "I was trying to remind you of what we used to have. I thought maybe if I could show you how much I still love you, you'd remember too." Beatrice turned away, her mind spinning. She had been right all along. Something had been missing between them, and Edward had known it too. But instead of facing it together, he had taken matters into his own hands, writing these letters in a desperate attempt to rekindle what they had lost. She felt torn between understanding his fear and anger at the deception. Beatrice stood in silence, her back turned to Edward as she processed everything he had just confessed. The man she thought she knew had been hiding his deepest fears and emotions behind anonymous letters, hoping to reach her in a way he couldn't in real life. It was both heartbreaking and infuriating. She spun around to face him, her voice trembling with emotion. "Edward, do you have any idea how confused I've been? These letters, they made me question everything. I thought someone else had seen something in me that you never did. I know," Edward interrupted, his voice thick with regret. "I didn't handle it the right way. I was scared of losing you, Bea. I thought you'd stop loving me." Beatrice's heart ached at his words. She had felt the same fears, but had never voiced them. They had both been drifting, losing sight of each other in the everyday routines of life. The love they once had, the fiery, intense connection, had faded into something comfortable, something predictable. And both of them had let it happen. "But manipulating me like this, how can I trust you now?" Beatrice asked, her voice soft but full of hurt. Edward stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I'm asking for a chance to make things right. I love you, Bea, more than anything. I wrote those letters because I was desperate to show you how much you still mean to me. But I don't want to hide behind them anymore. I just want you." Beatrice felt the weight of his words, her heart conflicted. She loved Edward. At least she thought she still did. But the past few days had shown her just how fragile their relationship had become. They couldn't go back to the way things were, but maybe they could rebuild slowly with honesty this time. "I don't know if I can just forgive this," she said, her voice trembling. "But maybe we can try, start over, and be honest about what we both need." Edward nodded, relief flooding his features. "That's all I'm asking for. A second chance." Beatrice took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their past and the uncertainty of their future. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like they might be able to find their way back to each other. The days that followed were a mixture of tentative steps forward and emotional reckoning. Beatrice and Edward had chosen to stay in the same city, but they agreed to take things slow. They spent time apart, reflecting on what they wanted out of their relationship, and then met for long, honest conversations about where things had gone wrong and how they could fix them. It wasn't easy. The wounds from the letters were still fresh, and the doubts that had crept in during those long weeks didn't disappear overnight. But Beatrice could see that Edward was trying. He was opening up in ways he never had before, sharing his fears and vulnerabilities instead of bottling them up. It was a side of him she hadn't seen in years. One evening, they met at the small park where they used to walk in the early days of their relationship. The air was crisp, and the trees were shedding their leaves, a sign of the change in seasons. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Edward said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "And I realize now that I should have never hidden how I was feeling. I should have come to you, told you everything. I was afraid you wouldn't love me the same way anymore." Beatrice looked at him, her heart softening. "I was afraid too," she admitted. "I think we both let our fears take over. But we can't hide from each other if this is going to work." Edward nodded, his hand reaching for hers. "No more hiding," he promised. They walked in silence for a while, their hands intertwined, feeling the slow but steady return of something they had lost along the way: trust. Beatrice wasn't sure where their relationship would go from here, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. As they sat down on a bench, the sun setting in the distance, Beatrice turned to Edward, a small smile on her lips. "So, no more letters?" Edward chuckled, his eyes brightening. "No more letters. Just us. Honest, real, and messy, but it's us." Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart finally at peace. The path ahead wasn't clear, but they were facing it together, and that was enough. For now, that was all she needed. If you like the story, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your suggestions and ideas for future stories. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when new content is released.